The practice of prescribing low-grade amphetamines to children with attention deficit disorder is intensely controversial. In Australia alone, more than 60,000 teenagers are being treated with powerful drugs like Ritalin. Now, for the first time, there's disturbing medical evidence about potential side effects from this treatment. New research out today in the Medical Journal of Australia says the medication may be stunting growth in boys and delaying puberty. As Connor Duffy reports, opponents of the drugs say they're overprescribed and being sold on the black market.
Everything has its season, everything has its time.
Today, Stephen Walter and his 17-year-old son Jordan are enjoying school holidays at home in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, sharing a love of music. But for Jordan Walter, growing up with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, meant there were challenges at home and at school.
When I hit third grade, I was finding the work that I was having difficulties completing it, and it was a bit strange and a bit conflicting being told I was smart and yet having difficulty completing this work. And I had to drop down a grade.
It affected him socially. I think it affected his confidence in himself and in his interactions with other people, children in particular of his own age.
Stephen Walter had to overcome initial reservations about his son using ADHD drugs and says he's glad he did.
The change with him taking medication was remarkably transformative in a way that I had not even imagined possible. He was much more able to cope with school, much more able to cope with social situations.
When you're on medication, it's really easy to focus on one thing at a time, and so I find that's great.
Stephen Walter was once reluctant to let Jordan get his hands on power tools. Now they happily work side by side together.
He's blossomed again in that way, to the fact that I now trust him reasonably well with power tools. Before, my fingers always cringed, and that's been a really good thing.
Jordan Walter's older brother Joshua doesn't have ADHD. Both boys recently participated in a study looking at the impacts taking Ritalin would have on Jordan. After years of anxiety, Stephen Walter was desperate for any extra information.
I have been worried about the effects of the drugs the entire time that my son has been on them. And I am still, I guess, a little worried about the long-term effects that it may have upon him neurologically, not just physiologically.
The lead author on this study is Dr. Alison Poulton.
Well, the peak age of diagnosis and treatment is between 7 and 8 years.
Dr. Poulton is a paediatrician who prescribes drugs like Ritalin and noticed some of her teenage patients seem to be growing more slowly than their peers.
When I started to plot out the growth charts of people I'd been treating as I accumulated months and a couple of years of treatment, then I found actually I was seeing this effect in my patients, so I wanted to look into it a bit more closely.
It prompted her to start a 3-year study of 65 teenage boys taking ADHD medication. She found that when the boys began taking the drugs, they lost weight, with the stimulants acting as an appetite suppressant. They also began to grow more slowly.
Their growth rate in height is slower for the first 3 years, and after 3 years they've got relatively normal rate of weight gain and growth in height, but of course they're smaller than they would have been otherwise because of that period of slower growth.
How much smaller?
It amounts to about 1 centimetre per year less growth, so overall about 3 centimetres.
The teenage boys in the study, aged 14 to 16, were also slower to reach puberty, a peak period of growth. Dr. Poulton believes being smaller and perhaps behind their peers physically could take an emotional toll.
They seem to be progressing more slowly through puberty and probably are having some delay in the peak height velocity, which happens in later stages of puberty.
So there could be late bloomers?
Exactly, yes. And whereas they catch up eventually. It could be quite a difficult time. Adolescence is a time of emotional turmoil.
Martin Whiteley is a retiring state politician in Western Australia. The former school teacher has spent years fighting the use of ADHD drugs.
It's a small-scale study, so you've got to appreciate there are limitations to the study, but it does reinforce previous research that shows that ADHD drugs are associated with stunted growth. So it doesn't surprise me, but it's just further evidence that in the long term, ADHD drugs do significant harm to children.
He says figures he requested from the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme show prescriptions continue to rise. Mr. Whiteley says the number of minors using the drugs rose from 54,000 in 2008 to more than 62,000 in 2011, a rise of about 15%. He's also concerned about a black market trade in the drugs.
We have a rate of adult prescribing in Perth that's 230% above the national average, and there's significant evidence that these are actually people seeking mainly a prescription of dexamphetamine so that they can use them as a lifestyle drug.
Back in the Blue Mountains, the Walter family remain wary of the drugs, but pleased with the results.
My reservations about medication are that I think that the drugs that are being used are quite powerful drugs. They are effectively methamphetamines.
Yes, I worry about the effects often. Especially when I was younger, I was worried about being underweight and the effects that would have on my health. I really think that the pros have outweighed the cons.
Connor Duffy reporting.